discussed this RRP idea. From where did we get this idea of RRP? What is the philosophy behind this? We will try to understand. One day, when we started Bengaluru branch, I have enrolled employees for cult membership. I want every member of the Law Excellence to spend one hour in cult. In such a situation, one day I went to see how it is going. Then there was speed commands from the instructor, and there is too much of participation or very good participation of both the instructor and the students, and the student do not know that he is doing so much of effort, and but whatever the effort he is doing, he is enjoying it. So let us understand this carefully. The instructor has a clear schedule of 45 minutes to 50 minutes. It has been divided into parts, and the students are not able to realize that 45 minutes to 50 minutes just over like that. What was the reason behind that? The energy of the instructor is flowing into the student or that particular trainees over there. And both instructor and the student are working together. There were no great instruments as like in gym. They are using certain flexi bands, etc. to do these high intensity exercises. Even the people with 100 kgs, they are enjoying the entire process of the exercise. There was no difference between a person who has fitness and the people who do not have fitness at all. It was a common exercise for everyone. And this is being done across the branches of CultFit. So it means they have created a program which is energy centric, which is based on speed, and also which is based on participation of the instructor and also the students. Why can't we create a similar program for the civil services students? This was the thought which have come to my mind. So then first for polity we did a rapid revision program, and we did workbook. And we experimented the entire course in Hyderabad. We got extremely good review. Then we have structured further. We have brought ready reckoners so that the student can go home and read that. And also we want to analyze how the student did before the RRP and did after the RRP. What is actual improvement in his performance? A pre-test and post-test are conducted. So we saw at least 36% of improvement is there in the students after the program. The reason is the statement-based questions which are very difficult for the students. He was able to handle that with a lot of ease. Because true and false statements in workbook, some fill in the blanks in the workbook, he was able to handle with much ease after the RRP session. Above all, reading the entire syllabus, it takes lot of time for the students. As we are able to complete entire polity subject in one day, maximum of 2 days, the student has got huge confidence. This subject is so simple. It is so simple, we have unnecessarily complicated it. But one caution which I want to say to the students is, you shall know the subject or might have gone through the subject and the topics at least once, so that you can make the best use of the RRP. The marketing name is Rapid Revision Program. The real name of this program is Revision, Recollection and Practice. So we want to give a marketing name. That's what we gave it as Rapid Revision Program. After this program was copied in different forms as Quality Improvement Program, Quick Revision Programs. Different institutes have come up with different marketing names. But the philosophy behind that, no one are able to copy even today. So they have tried to bring in programs, but the real intensity and the real value of the program still is intact. Today we are preparing similar kind of program for mains. And you all know that the ready reckoners which are being created for RRP program were a great success across India. And Mr. Shubham Kumar, who got All India Rank 1 in 2020, if I'm not wrong, he has given open endorsement to the ready reckoners of Law Excellence. If you want to revise, just revise these books, you can clear your prelims. To that extent, he gave an open endorsement. So in this case, the first part is called as revision. What do I mean by revision over here? So how it has started? So what are the components? There is the first component of this is called revision. What do we do in the revision? We take the entire syllabus. We try to revise with lot of intensity, where the students have to use the slides. The slides printout will be given to the students. They shall not answer or write down another notes. They just have to add more points whatever are flowing only in the PPTs which are being given to them. So these PPTs which are there over here will be given in printed form to the students. They have to write only on the PPTs. So the PPTs are the instrument which we are using for this. And second part is after the revision, where the teacher with high energy and speed has to revise the entire subject which I am going to demonstrate. The next part is called as recollection. So this recollection has two phases. One is passive recollection. The next one is called as active recollection. What is passive recollection? So teacher, he is going to recollect entire thing to the students, in which teacher will close the eyes and students have to take that information. So the technique of recollection, here the teacher will not deal in detail, just he will give the clues or briefly he will recollect, where he will demonstrate the technique of recollection to the students. After that is over, the next phase is called as an active recollection, where teacher will give clues to the students, students has to close their eyes and students have to recollect according to the clues given by the teacher. And final thing is, what do we call it as? Practice. What is the tool for practice? We have workbook. So in this case, the critical examples are elements where the student can go wrong and information which is required for the student, it is being practiced through the involvement of both student and teacher. So that's where revision, it is the teacher who will do all the work. He will give energy, effort and speed to the class. In the recollection, there is passive recollection where the teacher recollects and the student shall listen. In active recollection, teacher will assist the student so that student has to recollect. And then we have practice. We will give you the workbook and there will be table numbers in the workbook, and these workbooks have to be practiced both by the teacher and the student together. Now this year, what we are going to add? The previous year's questions, sessions will also be added along with this revision program. So that's why we call this as RRP plus program. RRP plus program. And after the session is over, we are going to conduct immediately a test of 50 questions. 1 hour test of 50 questions, which is in the classroom test will be there. And once they go home, they will be given one online test, which they have to attempt after reading the Ready Reckoner. So the Ready Reckoner is the simplified material of the entire subject. So before reading the Ready Reckoner, they have to answer one test paper that will explain how student has understood the RRP program. After that, we have to go home, read the Ready Reckoner of the day, and then we have to take another test so that with the effort of the student, how many marks he has improved, we will be able to understand. Now we are compiling the tests or questions of all the exams, Public Service Commission exams, UPSC, Public Service Commissions, and for that matter, even UGC exam together towards bringing this particular thing. Now, let us start the sample of this practice. So I am going to start the module. So entire syllabus is divided into different modules. So I am going to start with the polity module, that is fundamental rights. So the first part is revision. So what are fundamental rights? Why they are called fundamental rights? They are part 3 of the Constitution. They are also described as the conscience of the Constitution along with DPSP. They make the Constitution of India the most liberal constitution in the world. And what makes the liberal constitution? Especially the aspects of the fundamental rights which are equivalent with the Bill of Rights in India, the right to life and liberty, Article 19 of the Constitution that provides for the fundamental rights, and then 21 and 14, when they read together, we get the positive aspect of the life and liberty definition. So these are limitations on the power of the state. What does that mean by limitations? State cannot take away these powers, or state cannot take away the rights of the citizen. It means that these rights are supposed to protect the citizen from the absoluteness of the state. So that's why fundamental rights protects the citizen, and these are individual rights. Unlike DPSP, which are collective rights. The source of these fundamental rights is the Bill of Rights, and then these are also equated with the Magna Carta of United Kingdom. The Bill of Rights exists in the United States of America, and then Magna Carta is the equivalent of the fundamental rights in the United Kingdom. And these are negative in character. What is meant by negative in character? They are spelled in negative words. For example, if you take Article 21 of the Constitution, it says that a state shall not take away the life or liberty of a citizen except by the authority of law. Now, many of these fundamental rights have reasonable restrictions. It means that these fundamental rights are not absolute. And also these fundamental rights can be amended. So that's why they are not sacrosanct. How the fundamental rights can be amended? Supreme Court has clearly stated that the fundamental rights or any part of the Constitution can be amended other than the basic structure of the Constitution in Keshavananda Bharati judgment. In this case, the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act has amended the fundamental rights and removed the right to property. Now, many of the fundamental rights are also available to the people who are not the citizens of India. And few of the fundamental rights are also available to the private individuals, not just against the state. So here the student may get confused. What are the fundamental rights which are available to the people who are not the citizens of India? In this case, equality, the rule of law, obviously it has to be available to everyone. But remember, opportunities are limited. So we want to give opportunities first to our citizens, not to everyone. So in this case, Article 16 where employment opportunities, Article 15 where educational opportunities are being given. After that, freedom rights, where we have the right to criticize our own government and state, and cultural and minority rights. These are being given only to the citizens of India. Other than these rights, these are being available to every person. Now the next part is the fundamental rights which are available against the private citizens. Let us try to understand this way. The right against exploitation, either you are the state or the private individual, that shall not be followed. And before that, let us also understand habeas corpus, a writ petition, which can also be issued against the private individual. So, untouchability. So, it cannot be practiced either by the government or by the private individual. So, most of the rights against exploitation, against untouchability, against discrimination, these are available both against the states and also against the private individuals. That's what we need to remember. Now, with regard to the nature of the fundamental rights, let us recollect what we talked about. The fundamental rights are not absolute. The fundamental rights are not sacrosanct, but they can be called as the conscience of the Constitution. Fundamental rights, along with DPSP, they form the civil, political, socio-economic rights of the country. The fundamental rights are negative in character. It means that what the state shall not do towards the citizens is been mentioned in the fundamental rights. And fundamental rights state can impose the reasonable restrictions on the fundamental rights, and these can be subjected to the judicial review. They can be compared with the Bill of Rights in USA or Magna Carta in the case of United Kingdom. So this is what is the nature of the fundamental rights. Few of the fundamental rights are available only to citizens. Many of the fundamental rights even available to the non-citizens. Most of the fundamental rights are meant to control the state or to create to control the authority of the state so that it do not become authoritarian or absolute. But few of the fundamental rights are also to protect the citizens from exploitation of the other private individuals. So that's why abolition of untouchability, or for that matter prohibition of exploitation and prohibition of child labor, are also available against the private individuals. A writ petition called habeas corpus is also available against private individuals. These are the points which we talk with regard to the nature of the fundamental rights. The next part is, let's go towards the next part. So next part, we will talk about fundamental rights, Article 12 of the Constitution. So the Article 12 of the Constitution deals with the definition of the state. So what is the definition of the state under Article 12 of the Constitution? Any entity which is established by the Constitution or law of the Parliament or rule of the executive that comes under the definition of the state. Along with that, Any institution that is substantially financed by the state also comes under the definition of the state. But remember, what do not come under the definition of the state? You know that who has to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens? It is the judiciary. So that's why judicial and quasi-judicial bodies are exempted from the definition of the state. Remember here, any private entity which is working as the instrument of the state or providing for certain sovereign functions on behalf of the state, that also comes under the definition of the state. And then Article 13 of the Constitution, what it talks about is this: the judicial review is explicitly stated with regard to the protection of the fundamental rights under Article 13 of the Constitution. What it says is this: the state shall not make any law that violates the fundamental rights. Any law that violates the fundamental rights becomes null and void. Then the question comes is this: what about the pre-constitutional laws? The laws which are there before the constitution and which are being implemented now. See, Article 13 also applies to pre-constitutional laws and the post-constitutional laws. Here the word law: the state shall not make any law that violates the fundamental rights. Do all laws comes under the definition of the Article 13? Do all the laws comes under the definition of Article 13? No. What are the laws that comes into the definition of Article 13? And what do not come under the Article 13? Constitutional Amendment Acts, they do not come under the definition of Article 13. And then private or else personal laws also do not come under the definition of Article 13 of the Constitution. So any other law other than Constitutional Amendment Acts or personal laws, if they violate the fundamental rights, they become null and void to that particular extent. In this case, there is a doctrine that is called as Doctrine of Eclipse. So what is Doctrine of Eclipse? The fundamental rights, if any law is violating, it do not get completely deleted from the statute books. For time being, it will be shadowed by the fundamental rights. If tomorrow fundamental rights lose their efficacy or they are being removed from the constitution or made non-operational, these laws will be as good as the original laws. So that's why the doctrine of eclipse applies both for the pre and post constitutional laws, because they are still a good laws for the people who do not enjoy the fundamental rights, and also when fundamental rights are not available. So that is why Article 13 clearly states that the doctrine of eclipse applies both to the pre-constitutional and post-constitutional laws. From the prelims perspective, judicial review is explicitly stated in Article 13 with regard to the protection of the fundamental rights. Nowhere in the Constitution the judicial review is being stated. The next, let's go to the fundamental rights. In this, let's go towards the Article 14 of the Constitution. So Article 14 to 18, what do we call them as? Article 14 to 18, we call them as right to equality. So Article 14, the right to equality. Article 14, right to equality, it has two parts to it. One is equality before law, and the next is equal protection of law. Equality before law, it is the basis for this is rule of law. The rule of law has originated in UK. Mr. Dicey is responsible for this. So all citizens or all people are equal before law. No person is above law. So the law is king. That is lex rex. Law is king. In this scenario, what is being stated is this: no person is above law. Any person who violates the law is punishable. The violation of the law has to be established by ordinary courts in ordinary manner. And then there is a difference between UK and India. In the case of UK, rights forms the basis for the constitution. In India, constitution forms the basis for the rights. And this rule of law is a negative concept. It's a negative concept means it is negatively worded concept. On the other case, equal protection of the law is a positive concept. It is based on Aristotelian equal treatment of equals. What does that mean? Treating equals as unequals is inequality. Treating unequals as equals is inequality. So equals has to be treated equally, unequals has to be treated unequally. Treating unequals equals unequal, that becomes the inequality. So in this context, it has become the basis for the reservations in India. Right? So this is a positive concept. The United States Constitution is based on this. Providing for reasonable classification of the people also becomes the part of the equal protection of the laws. So let us take, in France there were privileges. Existence of privileges is not a reasonable classification. Any kind of class legislation is not allowed under the equal protection of the laws. The class legislation means the legislation which provides for the privileges for the few. So what this allows for is protection and justice to the marginalized sections of the society. So equality before law and then equal protection of the law. These two becomes the basis for the legal equality in India. Now when we go for the Article 15 of the Constitution, it states that state shall not discriminate the citizens only on the grounds of sex, race, religion, caste or place of birth. Here the word important is only. What do we mean by only over here? These shall not be the sole criteria for discrimination. They can be a secondary criteria for discrimination. And the same law also prohibits the discrimination in the case of public places. Article 15 subclause 2. It states that any kind of discrimination of the people on the basis of the caste in the public places shall not be allowed. And this has to be read along with the Article 17 of the Constitution, which talks about the abolition of untouchability, which also have to be read along with the Article 23 of the Constitution, which prohibits the forced labor, because manual scavenging, vetty, these are various forms of the forced labors which are being exercised on the basis of caste. When you read Article 15 subclause 2, 17 and 23 together, you can see the collective action of the Constitution of India against the practice of untouchability in this particular country. When we talk about 15 subclause 3, 15 subclause 4, they talk about certain special favorable treatment towards women and children, and also socially and educationally backward classes. In this case, 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act has brought the reservations to the OBCs in the educational institutions. This 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act has provided reservations in the central and state educational institutions. Either they are private or public, aided or unaided. If you carefully observe, in the case of the jobs, reservations exist only in the public sector. But in the case of the educational institutions, reservations exist both in private educational institutions and public educational institutions. Only educational institutions which are exempted from the reservations are the minority educational institutions. This is about the Article 15 of the Constitution. Now, we will stop it here. So this is about revision. So if you understand, almost entire subject is being revised, but at a much faster pace, so that you shall be active and through the entire class. You cannot remain slow or silent. You cannot be lethargic in the class. Now let's go for recollection. So what are the recollections we have? Passive recollection, where teacher will be active, but the students has to just listen. The next is called active recollection, where teacher will give clues and the student has to recollect the points in his mind. In the active recollection, student will close his eyes. In passive recollection, teacher will close his eyes. So now I am doing the passive recollection. I will close my eyes and I recollect for myself, which you have to imitate in your mind for yourself in the active recollection. So, in this class, we have started with the nature of the fundamental rights. We can say the nature of the fundamental rights, they are negative in character, they are not absolute, they are not sacrosanct, they can be amended, reasonable restrictions can be imposed, they are supposed to limit the power of the state. These are available for the citizens, they are individual in nature, and few of the fundamental rights are also available to foreigners, few of the fundamental rights are also available against the private citizens. What fundamental rights which are available to foreigners, which are not available to foreigners? Freedom rights, and then cultural minority rights added to the rights related to the opportunities in India. And the fundamental rights which are available against the private citizens, these are Article 15 subclause 2, 17, 23rd, 24th, which provide for the exploitation of the citizens. After that, we discussed about Article 12 of the Constitution, which talks about the definition of the state. Judicial, quasi-judicial bodies are excluded from this. Article 13 of the Constitution, where we discussed that state shall not make any law that violates the fundamental rights. Here, the definition of the law does not include constitutional amendment acts, and added to that, the personal laws. And then when we went to the Article 14 to 18 is called as right to equality. Article 14 provides for the legal equality. It has two provisions: equality before law, equal protection of the law. Equality before law is based on diocese rule of law. All citizens are equal before law. No one is above the law. Any violation of the law has to be punished, and violation of the law has to be established by ordinary courts in ordinary manner. And the rights of the citizens are to become the basis for the Constitution in UK. In the case of India, Constitution shall become the basis for the rights of the citizens. After that, we spoke about equal protection of the law. It is a positive concept based on Aristotle, based in USA, and in this case, equals have to be treated equally, unequals have to be treated unequally. Treating equals as unequals, unequals as equals is inequality. In this context, any kind of class legislation that provides for privileges for few is not allowed. But on the other hand, a positive legislation to provide for welfare of the marginalized sections can be allowed. The reservations in India is the example for this particular thing. On the other thing, Article 15, state shall not make any law that violates state shall not discriminate the citizens only on the grounds of sex, race, religion, caste or place of birth. Only means these cannot become the sole criteria of discrimination. And in this case, positive discrimination can exist towards women, children, socially and educationally backward classes. There shall be no discrimination in the case of public places. And reservations in educational institutions were introduced with the 93rd Constitutional Amendment Acts. It applies both to private, public, aided, unaided, but only exception are the minority educational institutions. This is what we have discussed in this particular class. Now, I will open my eyes. The passive recollection is mine. Now I will give you clues. You have to recollect in your mind with the speed how I have recollected my own information. So You have to close your eyes and I will give you the clues with open eyes. Please close your eyes. Nature of fundamental rights. Nature of fundamental rights. Article 12 of the Constitution, definition of state. Article 13, judicial review. The word law does not include. Article 14, components. Equality before law. Rule of law. Rule of law. Equal protection of law. Differences between India and UK in the case of equality before law. Article 15. 15 subclause 2. 15 subclause 5. 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act. 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act. Now slowly open your eyes. Right? So this is called recollection. You can see the workbook over here. We have done with the revision part, recollection part. Now we are doing with the workbook part. So everywhere there will be tables in the workbook. Now you have to read the tables and you have to give answers with expecting the answer, and at the same time you have to expect the answers from the student. So let us understand this way. So Article 12 of the Constitution. Now in this case, identify the right answer based on the definition of the state as per Article 12. So government and parliament, are they a part of state or not? They have been established by the Constitution. Any institution established by the Constitution comes under the definition of the state. So that's why they come under the definition of the state. Supreme Courts and High Courts. No, because judicial and quasi-judicial bodies are, they do not come under the definition of the state. Energy. Yes or no? No, Supreme Courts and High Courts, they do not come under the definition of the states. So this is the wrong answer. Local governments, yes or no? Yes. These are the public sector undertakings. Do they have substantial expenditure or not? District Planning Committee, 243 ZD. Yes or no? Constitutional body, yes. Private body working as an instrument of the state, yes. Public-private partnerships, no. NGOs, no. Private companies, no. Private companies carrying the government work. No, government work has to be sovereign in nature. They are doing contracts for the government, do not come under the definition of the state. So those are involved with security functions, etc. They come under the definition of the state. If they are involved as the instrument of the state, they come under the definition of the state. If they are just carrying out the government work, they do not come under the definition of the state on a contractual basis. Now, identify the right answer regarding the fundamental rights. So with regard to the fundamental rights, with regard to the nature of the fundamental rights, let us try to understand this. So fundamental rights are guaranteed and protected by the Constitution, yes or no? Yes, under Article 32 of the Constitution, you can directly go to the Supreme Court. Legal rights are guaranteed either by the Constitution or law of the legislature, yes. So legal rights, let's take MG Narega is a legal right. It has been guaranteed by the law of the Parliament. On the other hand, fundamental rights are guaranteed by the Constitution. And certain legal rights, let's take right to property and 300A, it has been guaranteed by the Constitution. So the legal rights can be guaranteed by the Constitution and also guaranteed by the Parliament. On the other hand, fundamental rights are only guaranteed by the Constitution of India. So these are the points which we need to talk about. So this is how we need to explain that.